It was supposed to be just another quiet evening on the outskirts of town. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and amber. A light breeze moved through the fields, whispering secrets known only to the wind. Emma wiped the grease from her hands, the scent of oil and rust lingering in the air. She closed the hood of the old pickup she'd been fixing, unaware that destiny was just around the corner, stranded on the side of the highway in a black luxury car. Jason had never experienced a breakdown before, not in a car, not in life. Everything he touched turned to gold. He was the man who closed multi-million-dollar deals from the back seat of his Bentley, who wore Italian suits like they were stitched onto his skin. But tonight, his perfectly crafted world was reduced to silence, save for the clicking of his overheated engine. He cursed under his breath, glancing around the darkening road. His phone had no signal. Of course, the one night he decided to drive out of the city to think, to escape the endless boardrooms and handshakes, he found himself powerless on the edge of nowhere. And then he saw her. Emma pulled her pickup onto the shoulder when she spotted the luxury car. No lights, no hazards, just a sleek silhouette against the fading light. She grabbed her flashlight and approached. "You need help?" she asked, voice calm and practical. Jason looked up, stunned. He wasn't used to people offering him anything without knowing his last name. "Yeah, the car just died. No idea what's wrong. I think it overheated." Emma crouched by the engine, flashlight in hand, as Jason stepped aside. He watched her, confused. A woman, alone, fearless, with dirt on her jeans and confidence in her movements. She worked quickly, with precision, brushing her auburn hair back occasionally, eyes focused. "You're lucky it didn't catch fire," she said after a minute. "You've got a busted radiator hose. Temporary fix, but you can make it a few miles if you don't push it." Jason blinked. "Wait, you're saying you just fixed it?" Emma smirked. "Temporarily. It'll get you off the highway at least." There was a moment of silence. Jason, the man used to power and predictability, felt something strange stir inside him. Gratitude and curiosity. "Can I buy you dinner?" "As a thank you?" Emma hesitated. She didn't need handouts, but something in his eyes, not desperation but honesty, made her nod. "All right, but it better be good." They drove into town in her old pickup, the irony not lost on Jason. She laughed when he struggled with the door handle. The restaurant was simple, rustic. He ordered nervously, fumbling with the menu. She watched him with quiet amusement. Over dinner, stories spilled out like old wine. He told her about growing up in concrete, skyscrapers instead of trees, stock tickers instead of lullabies, about building an empire just to realize he'd forgotten why he'd started. She told him about her grandfather's garage, how she'd learned to fix engines before she could reach the pedals, about staying behind to care for the shop after he passed, about never leaving because something always held her there, something she couldn't name. The hours blurred. Outside, the night deepened. A soft rain began to fall, tapping the windows in rhythm with their conversation. "I don't do this," Jason admitted, stirring the remnants of his coffee. "Talk to strangers, or feel this comfortable with someone I just met." Emma looked at him, her eyes steady. "Maybe we're not strangers. Maybe we've just been driving different roads to the same place." He smiled, and for once, it wasn't the kind he wore for cameras. That night, he stayed in a small inn near the shop. The next morning, he returned. Not to fix the car, but to see her, And the next day, and the day after that. They worked side by side, a man who'd never held a wrench in his life, and a woman who could rebuild an engine in her sleep. She taught him how to listen to machines. He taught her how to listen to herself. Between spark plugs and oil changes, something grew, something delicate, real. He stopped checking his emails. She started checking her heart. The town began to talk, but Emma didn't care. Jason, the millionaire who once couldn't fix a flat, now stood covered in grime, laughing beside her. He didn't care about mergers or shareholders. He cared about the way she tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she smiled when she caught him watching. One evening, as they closed the shop, Jason stood by the door and said, "What if I stayed?" Emma turned to him, unsure if she'd heard right. "I mean it," he said. "What if this us is the life I've been looking for all along?" Emma stepped closer, hands still stained from the day's work. "Then I'd say your engine wasn't the only thing that needed fixing." Jason couldn't remember the last time he had smiled like that, genuine, full, unguarded. Emma's presence had pulled something out of him he hadn't known was still there. And she, too, found herself glancing at him longer than she should, her heart beating just a bit faster whenever he laughed or leaned in to speak. They spent the rest of the afternoon in the warmth of Emma's garage, completely oblivious to the world beyond. The storm outside had faded into a quiet drizzle, but neither of them had noticed. Jason had rolled up his sleeves and offered to help clean up, though he was clearly unaccustomed to tools. Emma teased him about it, watching him fumble with a wrench before rescuing it from his hands. They laughed easily together, as though they'd known each other for years. When they finally stepped outside, the sky was painted in strokes of orange and lavender, the last light of day brushing against the wet asphalt. "I should go," Jason said softly, almost reluctant. Emma nodded, trying not to show the same hesitation. "Yeah, you probably should." He turned toward his car and stopped. "But could I see you again?" She looked up, surprised. "You want to?" "I do," he said, his eyes sincere. "You didn't just fix my car today, Emma. You reminded me what it feels like to actually connect with someone. That doesn't happen often." Her cheeks flushed, her heart skipping. "I'd like that," she whispered. "I'd really like that." Jason stepped closer, gently brushing a strand of damp hair from her cheek. There was a moment of silence between them, electric and fragile. Then, just before he turned to leave, he leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to her forehead. It was simple, delicate, but it held a promise. As he drove off, Emma stood at the edge of the garage, watching his car disappear into the twilight. Something had changed. She felt it deep inside. This wasn't just a chance encounter. It was the beginning of something that neither of them had expected, but both of them suddenly needed. Jason's world had changed in just a matter of days. The man who once lived in the cold corridors of penthouses and boardrooms was now laughing barefoot with Emma in her modest garage, sipping coffee that tasted better than anything he'd ever had at five-star cafes. They started spending more time together. He would bring broken gadgets from his mansion, not because he needed them fixed, but because he needed an excuse to see her. A broken radio, an old lamp, even a toaster. Emma would smile knowingly, playing along. Every visit became a memory, every glance a quiet confession. One evening, a storm rolled in. The wind howled through the countryside as rain battered the windows of her workshop. Jason had been helping her organize shelves, his suit jacket long forgotten on the dusty chair, sleeves rolled up, grease smudged on his cheek. He didn't care. He hadn't cared for days. The lights flickered and went out. Emma lit a lantern. Jason looked at her in the warm glow, her features soft and radiant in the amber light. "You know," he said quietly, "you've made this place feel more like home than anywhere I've ever been." Emma smiled, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Funny, I was about to say the same thing about you." Their eyes locked, and then, without planning it, without saying another word, Jason leaned in and kissed her. It was slow, hesitant at first, then deeper, filled with every unsaid word, every moment they danced around the feeling growing between them. When they pulled away, Emma's eyes were shining. "You're not just here for the toaster, are you?" she teased. Jason laughed. "Not even a little." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain, their hands intertwined. The moment stretched out, soft and infinite. The next few weeks passed in a dream. Jason delayed meetings. His assistant was baffled. Shareholders grew impatient, but Jason didn't care. He spent his days in Emma's world, helping her with repairs, learning the names of her chickens, watching sunsets from the porch. He learned how to live slowly, and Emma, who had spent so long guarding her heart, began to open it fully to him. But love, as always, brings its own storms. One morning, Jason received a call. A deal he had been working on for years, a billion-dollar merger, was at risk. The board was panicking. He was needed back in the city. "I have to go," he told Emma, his voice tight. "Just for a couple days." She nodded, trying to hide the flicker of fear in her eyes. "Of course, it's your life." He kissed her, promising he'd return quickly. But days turned into a week, then 2, then a month. Emma heard nothing. She tried calling once, but the number led to a secretary who offered a cold apology and a vague promise to pass on the message. It felt like being abandoned. Jason, meanwhile, was drowning. Back in the city, he found himself suffocating in deadlines, in boardroom drama, in a life that suddenly felt foreign. He stared at his reflection in the skyscraper windows, wondering when he had become so hollow again. He tried writing to her, once, twice. But every draft felt inadequate. How could he explain that the man she loved was now surrounded by people who didn't understand what mattered? Late one night, he finally snapped. He canceled meetings. He shut off his phone. He got in his car and drove for hours, the city disappearing behind him in the rearview mirror. When he reached her workshop, it was almost dawn. Emma was outside, repairing the fence near the chicken coop. She looked up, and for a moment her face was unreadable. Jason got out of the car slowly. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have left you like that." Emma stood still. "I tried to come back sooner," he continued, "but the truth is, I got scared. Scared of what I felt. Scared that maybe I didn't deserve something real." She set down the hammer. "And now?" she asked softly. "Now I know that nothing else matters," he said, stepping closer. "Not the money, not the titles, just you." Emma looked at him for a long moment, her eyes filled with 1,000 emotions, pain, hope, love. Then she said, "You broke my heart, Jason." "I know," he whispered. "Let me fix it, if you'll let me." There was a long pause. Then she nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. He walked to her, slowly, and wrapped his arms around her. She melted into him, and for the first time in weeks, they both exhaled. Later, sitting on the porch with coffee and a sunrise, Jason said, "I want to build a life here. With you." Emma laughed, wiping her eyes. "You sure you can handle rusty hinges and muddy boots?" Jason grinned. "Only if you promise to never let me forget what matters." She reached for his hand. "Deal." And just like that, in the quiet stillness of morning, the city boy and the country girl rewrote the story they were always meant to live. Together. The days that followed felt like something out of a forgotten dream. Simple, warm, and soaked in the kind of joy that doesn't ask for attention. Jason, once tethered to conference calls and corporate forecasts, found peace in the rhythm of Emma's world. Mornings began with sunlight spilling through linen curtains, the smell of fresh bread rising from the kitchen, and Emma humming softly as she poured coffee into mismatched mugs. He had traded boardrooms for barn doors, tailored suits for rolled-up sleeves, and tension-filled days for laughter-filled evenings. And for the first time in his life, he felt present, truly present. One afternoon, while they were repainting the side of the old garage, Emma stepped back to admire their work and laughed. "What's funny?" Jason asked, wiping sweat from his brow with a paint-splattered rag. "I just never thought I'd be doing this with a billionaire," she said with a grin, "let alone falling for one." Jason walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "That makes two of us. But truth is, I don't feel like a billionaire anymore. I feel like a man who finally found what money can't buy." She leaned into him. "I hope that's not just a pretty line." He turned her gently to face him. "It's not. Emma, I want to build a life with you, not just visit on weekends. I want a future that includes morning coffee, flat tires, rainy days, and growing old on that porch swing." She looked at him, her eyes wide and vulnerable. "Are you serious?" He nodded. "Completely. I've already started selling parts of the company. I'll keep a hand in things, but I've appointed a new CEO. I want something real now. Something that doesn't vanish when the stock drops 2 points." She smiled, still stunned. "That's the most reckless and romantic thing I've ever heard." Jason chuckled. "Then let me top it." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn box. "This was my mother's," he said. "I've had it for years, waiting for a reason to believe in something other than numbers and deals." Emma opened the box slowly. Inside was a delicate gold ring with a single sapphire in the center, surrounded by tiny diamonds, understated, elegant, and full of history. "Emma," Jason said, his voice suddenly raw, "will you marry me?" For a long moment she didn't answer. Then, eyes glistening, she said, "Yes. Yes, Jason, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring on her finger as the late summer breeze moved through the fields around them, the sun beginning its golden descent behind the hills. The wedding was small, just the way they wanted it. They held the ceremony beneath an old oak tree behind Emma's house, its thick branches draped with string lights and flowers. Her closest friends came, along with Jason's sister and a few of his most loyal employees, people who had seen him change and supported it. Emma wore a simple dress that flowed with the wind, her hair adorned with wildflowers. Jason wore suspenders and a white shirt, his usual polish traded for something far more genuine. When they exchanged vows, there wasn't a dry eye in sight. "I promised to never forget the day my car broke down," Jason said, voice steady but full of emotion, because it led me to the only place I ever truly wanted to be, by your side. And I promise, Emma replied, her voice trembling, to love you not for your past or your name, but for the man who found home in a rusty garage and chose love over everything else. They kissed under the soft light of lanterns as the stars appeared above them, applause and laughter echoing across the field. Their honeymoon wasn't in the Maldives or on a yacht. Instead, they packed a camper van and drove through the countryside, stopping wherever the view felt right. They hiked through quiet forests, swam in hidden lakes, and fell asleep to the sound of rain on the roof of the van, wrapped in each other's arms. They lived the kind of life most people overlook in search of something louder. Years passed, and the world kept spinning. Jason and Emma opened a small mechanic school in town, Emma's Garage, where they taught young people not just how to fix cars, but how to build lives with integrity, grit, and heart. Jason used his resources to fund scholarships, and Emma turned every lesson into a story. They spent their mornings drinking coffee on the porch, watching the fog lift from the fields, and their evenings cooking dinner together while music played low in the background. And sometimes, when the wind was just right, Jason would dance with her in the kitchen, bare feet on old wooden floors, the dogs circling around their legs. They didn't need skyscrapers or headlines. They had each other. One winter evening, after nearly a decade together, Jason looked out over the fields dusted with snow, Emma curled up beside him with a blanket over their laps. He kissed her forehead and whispered, "Thank you for fixing more than just my car." Emma smiled, resting her head on his shoulder, "And thank you for choosing the detour." And as the fire crackled and the stars blinked silently above, their love remained, simple, strong, and unwavering. Because sometimes the most extraordinary love stories don't begin in palaces or penthouses. They begin on a roadside with a broken engine and a spark that no amount of wealth could ever buy.